Football Weekly Very Extra, back because you didn't demand we didn't, with another Europa League bulletin. Today, Spurs come up short despite aiming for the stars. Literally, in Adebayor's case, Benfica and Newcastle's run philosophical questions in Rome as Lazio fall in the stadium, but nobody's there to see it. While at Chelsea, the Rafa master plan continues. FA Cup, Europa League and leaving club in 5th with a note saying, enjoy the Europa League football, Jose. We review the action plus, if they hurry up a bit, the draw for the next bit of Europa fun in today's Football Weekly, etc. Hi, right, everybody, welcome along. Gregg Bakowski.
Hi, James.
Amy Lawrence.
Hello.
And TV CNN's Pedro Pinto.
Hi.
Hi. I know what you're thinking. They don't look anything like what we thought. That's because they're actors brought in to play the parts. Pedro, it's big draw day over in Neon. Must feel a bit strange, you know, not being there, picking balls out of a thing.
Yeah, I do the Champions League one every year now for 7 straight seasons.
What's that like?
It's one of my favorite weeks of the year because you get to have the lifestyle of the rich and famous without being rich and famous. So you're mingling around everybody in the world of football is there. And then being backstage with some of the top footballers, because they also give out the prize for European Footballer of the Year there now. So yeah, it's an amazing experience.
It's the Monte Carlo job, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is. And this year, they're going to have the draw still in Monte Carlo, and then they play the Super Cup in Prague, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a different setup, but it'll be equally as fun, I'm sure.
Right, OK. Well, the draw's already been made for the Europa League. We're just standing by for the Champions League. Spurs, of course, won't be taking part in it after that pretty dramatic 120 minutes there in Basel. One thing I think stands out for everybody, Amy, it's the Adebayor penalty.
Yeah, I mean, you wonder if he'd be auditioning for a sort of John Cleese-esque Ministry of Silly Walks style.
Yeah,
there was something
bizarre.
very peculiar about his run-up. But personally speaking, I'm always a bit loath to get too stuck into anyone who misses a penalty because I just think it's a quite hideous thing to have to do at the end of a match. And people have their ways of trying to deal with the pressure situation, and Adebayor's was pretty unique, but I still think in the end it's you're in a horrible situation. I would never criticise someone for missing a penalty.
Don't you think last night perhaps Brad Friedel went down a little bit too early on Spurs penalties, and maybe Villas-Boas has been a little bit too kind to him by keeping him as the cup keeper, because his distribution isn't as good as Lloris when they're actually playing. So maybe Spurs don't get playing in the same way they do when Lloris is in the goal. But I thought yesterday, just at times, he was almost on the floor before they'd taken the penalty, which just made it so much easier than.
It's an interesting point because Villas-Boas making this big thing of taking the Europa League seriously, but Brad Friedel in both legs, I think, not just on the penalties, has been one of the weaker points of Spurs.
But at the beginning of the season, he looked undroppable, and when Lloris first arrived,
last night, that would be handy, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but it was a really difficult situation, I think, in a way, when Lloris first arrived, because he expected to walk into the team, and Friedel didn't deserve to be dropped at all at that point, and he handled it quite sensitively. But I can tell, I think they're not playing, and Friedel had played so many games in succession for years and years and years on end. I'm sure it's a Premier League record of seasons on end that he'd not missed a game for. Not playing regularly does seem to have taken that touch of percentage away from his game. He's not quite, I think, the same player, and maybe age, you can feel it a bit more when you're not playing so regularly.
I definitely think so. He does a lot of yoga to stay in shape, I know that for sure, but I don't know how yoga keeps you match fit, which that is the difference.
Because you're going to be that sharp, haven't you?
Yoga, like slow stretches, down to one side. Maybe he ought to be doing something else. Yeah.
Well, Villas-Boas saluting his team, calling them heroes, and saying that they've changed the way that the English view the Europa League. Do you think that's true, Greg?
Possibly, although the Europa League, there's been great matches in it when there haven't been English teams involved. I mean, perhaps because it's the English public have had or the British public have had the chance to see English teams competing in it, and perhaps taking it a little bit more seriously than they would do normally. It has elevated its status, but there've been really good matches in it for the last 3 or 4 years.
Even when you think of Fulham and Middlesbrough in years gone by, they treated the competition in a very similar way to the way Spurs did. I think perhaps the difference is that Spurs like to think of themselves as a Champions League team, and therefore, but they're saying by implication, we're taking it seriously, which is not always the case for teams that consider themselves in that highest echelon, whereas a Middlesbrough or a Fulham isn't actually aspiring to be a Champions League team, so they can approach it with a different kind of mentality.
Well, I think it really helped the Europa League teams that there were no English teams in the quarterfinals of the Champions League, so more attention was on them anyway. So 3 teams in the Europa League quarterfinals is a good achievement. I don't think Newcastle, when they started this season, they had any kind of aspirations to get there, and obviously Chelsea started in the Champions League, but I really think that they want to go on to win it, and they're my favourites.
All right. What about Basel then? How much for a challenge? They've drawn Chelsea in the semi-finals. How big a challenge is that going to be?
I think they're a really tough team. I've watched them play for several seasons now in the Champions League, and at home especially. It's such a cosy stadium, and the atmosphere there is actually very English-like. And they've got a lot of experienced players. The captain Streller has been around forever. Alexander Frey has banged in goals, and he's a hero there. He's very, very difficult to handle if you're a defender. I think it's a very tough away game, but I think Chelsea have too much quality not to go through.
The one thing I'd say about Chelsea, I've seen defensively, I mean, yesterday I thought defensively against Rubin Kazan, they were really poor, and they were poor at just doing the bog standard stuff of defending crosses, which were bog standard, they were just normal crosses into the box, which they should be able to deal with. I wonder whether playing Basel might not actually be the best draw for them, because Basel might play a more routine style of football than perhaps Benfica would be. And you look at Chelsea last year in the Champions League, they were able to deal with Barcelona because they didn't have that many physical players. They tried to play through them, and they were able to deal with that kind of stuff. The more mundane style of play Chelsea haven't been able to deal with this season, so that could actually mean that they struggle against Basel.
Well, you saw their game against away in Moscow against Rubin Kazan, and some talk of complacency in their performance. I don't know what you think about that.
Perhaps. I mean, the goal was the first goal was just given to them by Rubin Kazan's goalkeeper, just legging out of his area for absolutely no reason.
Really?
Yeah. And Torres just dinked it over his head.
It was a lovely ball up.
It was a lovely ball from Lampard, but
brilliantly taken by Torres.
Yeah, but the goalkeeper, he had no chance. I mean, he was like 15 yards away from Torres by the time that Torres got there.
We scored 2 in the first leg of this one, and then he had a big role in the comeback against Sunderland. Do you think Benitez has got a bit of a decision on regarding who he fields on the weekend against Man City, or would it just be straight?
I think he'll go straight back to Bar. Yeah, I mean, Bar's been playing. He's been playing very well, and he does. I mean, against City, I think he'll play the kind of the hold-up centre forward role better than Torres will, and maybe now, because of the amount of games that Chelsea have got to play in quick succession, I think it makes sense to be alternating between Bar and Torres, and Torres will probably be the player he goes to for the semi-final.
Chelsea-Basel then in one semi-final, the other one being Fenerbahce taking on Benfica after 2 very, very different quarter-finals. Benfica going past Newcastle in a St James's Park packed with passion and drama and noise, whereas for Fenerbahce it was an absolutely empty Stadio Olimpico in Rome due to Lazio's ban on supporters attending, and a 1-1 draw which saw the Turks through to their first ever semi-final, saluted thus by Turkey's photomat today, a boot with the word Lazio on it, and buried. There you go, they certainly did. Exciting times for Fenerbahce, who are packed with all sorts of familiar names. Hey, Amy.
Yes, there's quite a few that will be recognised by English fans.
Let's hear them.
Joseph Yobo is there, Raul Morelos.
Dirk
Kuyt, that's right. Rito Ziegler. What's interesting for Fenerbahce is that they've clearly been overshadowed by the sort of Galatasaray Galactico Light experiment that's going on there, and previous to this explosion at Galatasaray, I think Fenerbahce were the dominant team in Turkey, so it's going to be a very meaningful thing for them to try and reach the final. I don't think that they've ever been in a European final before, and that's something that Galatasaray managed in 2000, and where they went on to become the first Turkish team to win in Europe, which is something that they're incredibly proud of. So there's great reasons for Fenerbahce to be incredibly excited about this.
Absolutely, plus it's their first semi-final ever.
There you go.
Apparently. There you go. Tough draw for them, though, against a Benfica side who people are beginning to think, look a bit tasty there. You saw the Newcastle game.
I did. 36 matches unbeaten, Benfica now, this season. They've lost 2 games all season long. 1 to Barcelona, one to Spartak Moscow, both in the Champions League. Haven't lost in the Portuguese league yet, and they're on their way to winning the title. They're 4 points clear of Porto. Look, Benfica lost 2 huge players in the summer, in Axel Witsel to Zenit, and also Javi Garcia to Manchester City, but they've been able to put together quite a good run. Not quite good enough for the Champions League, but good enough to make their way to the semi-finals of the Europa League. I think they're a really solid unit. They weren't particularly great at Newcastle, especially in the second half. A lot of nerves there for some reason, because technically they were superior to Newcastle, played the ball better than Newcastle, but the atmosphere here in England is something Portuguese and South American players really struggle with, because they're just not used to it. And when that noise level comes up, I can feel the legs of the players shaking, and it really makes a big difference. I mean, even you have a record you have a look at the record the Portuguese teams have up in Scotland with Celtic and Rangers, and it's not good at all because of that noise. They can't deal with that very well. So, look, Benfica are going to have a tough time against Fenerbahce, I think, especially there as well, with that atmosphere in Istanbul. But they have enough quality to go through. Chelsea, again, I'll say, they're still the favourites.
But Newcastle had their chances, and then the noise getting cranked up after Cisse scored his 5th goal in 5 games. And then, had Hatem Ben Arfa managed to find the target with his big chance, then it could have been the Magpies going through. But the good news, at least for Newcastle, ahead of the derby with Sunderland this weekend, the fact that he's back in the picture and looking dangerous. Oh, we should just quickly mention, though, that the Champions League draw has been made. Quick comment on this. Bayern taking on Barcelona and Dortmund taking on Real Madrid.
I would have liked to have seen Barca and Bayern play in the final, just because of the dynamic of the two teams, and Bayern having Guardiola go there next year. I know a lot of people just want the Clasico, but I mean, just the amount of coverage there's going to be of a Clasico final, if that does happen, he might melt the world, I think. I think the 4 champions then. I mean, like, Barcelona are going to win the league. Real won it last year. Dortmund won Bundesliga last year, and then you've got Bayern who've walked away with it this year. So it's just, I mean, the 4 fantastically powerful, brilliant sides.
Would Bayern be the favourite against Barcelona, do you think?
With Barcelona's it's just Barcelona's defence is just so questionable at the moment. It probably comes down to, again, whether Messi's fit and if he starts, because if he does, then they will essentially be attacking for so often for such large parts of the game that Bayern might not be able to attack themselves. But Barcelona, when teams attack them and they've got a makeshift defence like they did in the week, they just look so vulnerable.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dortmund Real looks, Real looking in pretty awesome form in their quarter-finals, but then Dortmund beat them, of course, in the group stage. So.
I'm curious to see how Dortmund handle it sort of in their minds, because I felt that they got a bit nervous in the second leg against Malaga, and it was a great game. I was completely transfixed, but it did look like they were obviously on the verge of going out, and their resilience was incredible, and a bit of luck helped them too.
Yeah.
But they didn't play to their kind of effervescent best, I didn't feel, during that game. And you could just feel the occasion was getting to them slightly. And whether that affects them in a semi-final against Real.
There was an expectancy against Malaga, though, where I think against Real they were going into it as underdogs, and perhaps that will be what they need. And they've obviously faced Real and know what they're about as well.
Final question for Pedro, then. Is this where Jose signs off with another trophy?
I think he's leaving 99% sure. He recently said he's going to sit down with Florentino Perez at the end of the year to decide his future, but I think it's decided, and they're just going to work out how much money he's going to get to walk, or what kind of deal they're going to settle. So, yeah, I think Real will get to the final, and if it's against Barcelona, they've got a really good chance, taking into account they haven't lost to them this season. And I think this will be his farewell tour, so to speak, now. Until the end of the year. Liga's gone. He'll want to win the Spanish Cup, and the Champions League, La Décima at Real, would put him in the record books, which, as we know, he enjoys.
Yeah, he certainly does. Very good. That's it for today's Football Weekly Very Extra. Many thanks for joining us, Greg, Amy and Pedro. We'll be back with our bog standard Football Weekly on Monday, so do make time to join us for that, rounding up another exceptional weekend in the Premier League, FA Cup, etc. Have a super weekend in the meantime, and bye from us all.